We have so many stories in our lives, but our stories are not always heard. On the Hear My True Story podcast, we tell our own true stories.
Before the white car parked, our head teacher had scattered. Looking at him, I could only see his tie that was flying backwards, waving at us, and he disappeared in thin air.
I want to share my life story. I want to share my voice with the people because I know that just a small joke I can tell through this podcast, it will make someone smile.
When you ask me what I fear most in life, I would definitely respond to you and say it's fear itself.
We are fighting for togetherness. We are fighting for equal rights. We are fighting to end injustice.
You don't have to be a storyteller or writer because, guess what? Life writes the best stories.
Hear my true story.
We were raised speaking English. It was the official language necessary for opportunities. Schools enforced English, and we were punished for speaking our mother tongue. Now in Germany, I have to learn German. Learning German wasn't easy. I needed it for jobs and education.
This is your favorite time of the week with your number one podcast.
Hear my true story.
Yeah, my dear listeners, welcome to Hear My True Story podcast. I'm your host, Otako, and today I want to share a deeply personal story about being lost in languages. Imagine being fluent in your mother tongue, and then as you come into contact with languages from around the world, getting lost in a river of languages. This is my story. I grew up in Uganda, a country with many languages. I speak over 10 languages from my home country. And in addition, I speak English, a bit of Swahili, and now German. Getting lost is very easy. But here is how I got lost in languages. When I moved to Germany, I had to learn German or leave. Germany makes you adapt quickly. The system forces you to either learn the language or find yourself isolated. As I focused on mastering German, I started losing my fluency in both my mother tongue and English. It was a difficult transition, and it came with significant sacrifices. Imagine going for months without speaking your mother tongue. There are many things I struggled to express myself, especially those that were not part of my upbringing in Uganda. For example, I did not grow up with strawberries, so I have no idea how to name them in Lusoga, Luganda, or Swahili. Literally, I don't know. It gets even more complicated because I have a child. It is crucial for the child to know my mother tongue, yet I find myself struggling to find the right words for certain fruits, foods, or items that we encounter in our daily lives. This disconnect makes me feel like a stranger to my own language and culture. I consider myself a human lost in languages. Anyone multilingual in a non-colonial language might understand what I mean. You know, colonial languages still influence our lives. I mean, if you visit any country in the global south, like in Africa, you will find kids fluently in colonial languages, but not in their native languages. It is really heartbreaking. It is really annoying. When I became a father, I promised myself that my child would speak my mother tongue. But being lost in languages means I end up speaking English with my child. Even though I am not an English person, I am a Ugandan lost in languages. Growing up in a country colonized by Britain, we were raised speaking English. It was the official language necessary for opportunities. Schools enforced English, and we were punished for speaking our mother tongue. Now in Germany, I have to learn German. Learning German wasn't easy. I needed it for jobs and education. Do I speak my mother tongue every day? I would love to, especially with my child. But it is a challenging story after learning English and German. I still find myself lost in languages, unable to express myself perfectly in any of them. Colonialism might seem long gone, this is what I can say, but its effects linger. In a country with over 50 languages, only the colonial ones are widely known. Raising a child in Germany, a former colonial power, complicates things further. I want to speak my mother tongue, but I struggle with the right grammar for certain objects, foods and fruits unfamiliar to me from Europe. Maintaining fluency in over 10 languages is a challenge. I wonder how to keep it up. For parents from formerly colonized countries, ensuring their children speak their mother tongue is tough. Living in a colonial power country like Germany makes it harder. How do I maintain my mother tongue? Grammar. Many objects and foods in Europe weren't in Africa, so I lack the vocabulary. People might think I am taking an easier path, but it is tough. If you speak colonial languages like English, Spanish, German, or French, you won't get lost. But imagine speaking those languages and others like Luganda, Lusoga, Runyolo, and Swahili. Speaking them all the time is impossible, and they get lost. In Africa, children often speak more colonial languages than their mother tongues. Don't blame them. Blame the colonial powers. You see, colonizers undermined native languages, making them seem inferior. Schools in Uganda, my home country, push colonial languages. In Germany, there is no school teaching Lusoga, my mother tongue, or Swahili. You learn it from someone or within a community. But without a big community, you lose your mother tongue. Reflecting on this journey, I realized that languages are more than just a means of communication. They are the essence of our identity, culture, and heritage. Losing fluency in my mother tongue feels like losing a part of myself. It is a constant struggle to maintain the delicate balance between embracing a new culture and preserving my own. What do I do as Otako who's lost in languages? I just keep trying. Sometimes I just keep playing music that is in my native languages. Maybe with the music, I am able to maintain some of my language fluency. So, before I say, my dear listeners, before I stop sharing this story with you, I just realized that it is quite interesting how colonialism had a deeper and lasting impact on the languages of the countries that were colonized. When European colonial powers like Britain, France, Germany, Portugal, and Spain took over countries in Africa, Asia, and Americas, they imposed their own languages on the people. This was done for several reasons: to make administration easier, to spread their culture and values, and establish control. In many countries in Africa, including Uganda, colonial powers set up schools that taught only in their language. In Uganda, English became the medium of instruction. Children were punished for speaking their native languages in schools. Up to date, this made English the language of opportunity and success. If you did not speak English well, you would not get a good job or a good education. Over time, native languages were seen as less valuable. They were associated with being uneducated or backward. This attitude still exists up to date. As a result, many people from formerly colonized countries speak the colonial language more fluent than their language. Even after gaining independence, the influence of colonial languages remained strong. Governments often keep the colonial language as the official language. This was partly because it was already established, and partly because it was a neutral choice in countries with many different ethnic groups and languages. However, this has created a situation where people feel disconnected from their cultural heritage. They speak the colonial language at work, in schools, and often at home, while their native languages slowly fade away. Today, in countries like Germany, there are few opportunities to learn or maintain native languages from Africa. There are no schools teaching languages like Lusoga, Luganda, Swahili. People learn them from family or community members. But if your community is small, the language can easily be lost. This is a common experience for many immigrants from formerly colonized countries living in Europe or America. So, when we see children in African countries speaking English, French, Portuguese more fluent than their native languages, it is a direct result of colonial policies that favored the colonial language over local languages. These children are part of a system that was designed to erase their linguistic and cultural heritage. It is a system designed to maintain the colonial languages powerful, up to date. It pains, but it is the reality. So, my dear listeners, thank you for listening to this wonderful episode of Hear My True Story. If you have a feedback, a message, or a story to share, please check the description of this episode. Your support keeps us going. I hope you enjoyed this episode. See you next time. And by the way, keep listening to Hear My True Story podcast. It has been me, your host, Otako. Thank you for always supporting us. And I would like to say bye for now.
We not only have voices for a podcast, but also faces for YouTube. Don't miss your next episode. Hear My True Story.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, Music by Edwin Matovo, hosted and produced by Otako. Subscribe to our podcast for more stories and visit us on our website, hearmytruestory.com, for more stories. All the links are listed in the show notes of this podcast.